The briefing room felt more like a courtroom than a hub of military strategy. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, their glow flattening the faces of decorated officers gathered around the long polished table. Rows of uniforms, crisp and severe, lined the back wall. The smell of burnt coffee lingered, mixing with the faint tongue of metal from the flight gear locker just outside. At the head of the table stood Rear Admiral Thomas Kane. His uniform was immaculate, the silver stars on his collar catching the light with every slight movement. His voice, sharp and deliberate, sliced through the room. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," Kane barked, his eyes drilling into the lone woman standing at attention before him. "You are dismissed from this program." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. No one dared shift in their seats. No one cleared their throat. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector, its blue screen forgotten on the wall behind Kane. Jessica Hayes stood rigid, shoulders squared, hands locked behind her back. To anyone looking in from the outside, she looked like the perfect officer, disciplined, controlled, unyielding. But beneath that calm exterior, her chest burned. Every instinct screamed to argue, to fight back. Yet she knew better. She had already spoken her mind once. Earlier in the briefing, Kane had outlined the upcoming operation with a cool, rehearsed confidence. A high-value target in the Middle East, intelligence suggesting fortified defenses, and a SEAL team tasked with insertion. The plan was textbook, the kind that looked neat on paper but unraveled in real life. Jessica, call-sign Valkyrie, had listened in silence at first. But when Kane glossed over the enemy's anti-air capabilities, surface-to-air, systems that could shred helicopters before they even touched the ground, she couldn't stay quiet. "With respect, sir," she had said, her voice cutting through the chatter of junior officers. "That plan risks unnecessary casualties. We'd be sending those men into a kill zone." Kane had stiffened immediately. The air changed. Every officer in the room had sensed it, the line being crossed. "I don't recall asking for your tactical assessment, Lieutenant Commander," Kane had replied, his tone ice. But Jessica didn't back down. "Then respectfully, Admiral, I'd suggest we delay until we can secure proper air superiority. Otherwise, you're asking me to fly blind cover against an enemy already prepared for us. I won't sign off on a suicide mission." Gasps had fluttered through the room like wind through leaves. Nobody told Kane no. And now, 10 minutes later, she was standing in front of him as he publicly severed her from the program. Kane let the silence linger for effect, letting every man and woman in the room absorb the weight of what had just happened. Then, with deliberate calm, he continued. "Your record is exemplary," he said coldly. "But excellence is no substitute for discipline. A chain of command exists for a reason. If every officer second-guessed their superior, this Navy would descend into chaos. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately." Jessica's jaw tightened. She kept her face neutral, but inside her pulse hammered. She wanted to spit words back at him, to remind him of the times her judgment had saved lives, of the times her instincts had proven right when command had been wrong. She wanted to throw her medals at his feet and dare him to question her loyalty. But she did none of that. Instead, she lifted her hand in a precise salute, her eyes locked on his. The salute was sharp, flawless, almost defiant in its perfection. Kane held her gaze for a moment, then gave the barest nod. "Dismissed," he said again, softer this time, almost like a whisper. Jessica pivoted on her heel and marched out. The sound of her boots striking the tile echoed louder than any applause, louder than any reprimand. Behind her, the room remained frozen in silence. Out in the corridor, the air felt colder. Jessica exhaled, steadying herself. She had been in combat zones where tracer fire cut the sky and anti-air missiles locked onto her jet. Yet nothing rattled her quite like the sting of betrayal from her own chain of command. Her career wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. She had poured every ounce of herself into the cockpit of an F-22, into the missions that had forged her legend among the SEALs. The call sign Valkyrie wasn't handed to her in some hazing ritual. It was earned, etched into her identity through fire and blood. She thought back to Kandahar, to that mission where a platoon had been pinned down in a canyon, enemy fire raining from every ridge. Drones couldn't get in. Helicopters couldn't approach. But she had swooped in low, skimming the mountain peaks, tearing apart the enemy positions with precision strikes that textbooks said were impossible. The SEALs on the ground had given her the name Valkyrie, afterward goddess of war, chooser of the slain. To them, she wasn't just a pilot. She was a shield. And now, to Kane, she was nothing more than an obstacle. Jessica stopped outside, near the tarmac. Jets stood in neat rows, their gray paint glinting in the afternoon sun. The American flag snapped in the breeze overhead. She breathed deep, forcing her anger down. Boots approached from behind. She turned slightly, expecting an officer coming to deliver paperwork, or worse, an escort to make sure she left the premises. Instead, she found herself face to face with Chief Petty Officer Ramirez. "Ma'am," he said, standing at rigid attention. Jessica frowned. "Chief, you don't have to." Before she could finish, Ramirez snapped his hand up in salute. Emotion was crisp, deliberate, and loud in its meaning. Jessica blinked. Her throat tightened. And then more boots. One SEAL, then another, and another faces she knew from missions. Men who had followed her voice through the chaos of battlefields. They lined up silently, forming a row across the tarmac. One by one, their hands rose in salute. Jessica's chest ached. She swallowed hard. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Ramirez's voice was steady. "Admiral Kane may run the Navy, ma'am. But you," he nodded firmly, "you run us." For the first time that day, Jessica's composure cracked. Not in tears, not in anger, but in the realization that loyalty wasn't tied to rank. It was tied to trust. And trust was something no admiral could command. From the windows above, Kane watched. His jaw tightened, his hand frozen on the blinds. The sight below hit him harder than any reprimand he could deliver. The SEALs weren't just saluting a pilot. They were saluting their leader. For the first time in his career, Admiral Kane felt something colder than anger. He felt fear, because authority could be ordered, but respect that could only be earned. And Jessica Hayes had just claimed it, even in exile. The afternoon sun hung low over the base, its heat pressing down on the cracked concrete of the flight line. The hum of engines drifted across the airfield where ground crews worked in steady rhythm, wrenches clanging against fuselages. Beyond the razor wire fence, the desert stretched wide and empty, shimmering under the haze. Jessica Valkyrie Hayes stood alone, her shadow stretching long across the tarmac. She folded her arms, boots rooted to the ground, eyes fixed on the American flag whipping violently in the wind. Every gust reminded her of the storm brewing inside her chest. Dismissed. The word clung to her like smoke. She had faced SAM sites, dogfights, missions where a single misstep meant death. She had been shot at, locked onto, and even once forced to eject into hostile terrain. But nothing felt as crushing as being stripped of purpose by her own chain of command. It wasn't just a career. It was who she was. Her call sign wasn't a gimmick. Valkyrie had been earned the hard way through battles, where SEAL teams and Rangers owed their lives to her flying. She could still hear the radio chatter in her mind, panicked voices pinned down, her own steady tone cutting through chaos. Kodiak team, hold position. Valkyrie inbound. 30 seconds. She had always kept her promises. But promises meant nothing against politics. She felt eyes on her. The kind of cautious stares that come when others want to approach, but don't dare. Young pilots walked by with their heads down. Ground crews avoided glances. Once, she had been the pride of the base, proof that grit and talent could shatter barriers. Now she was radioactive, a name people didn't want on their lips for fear Kane would notice. She clenched her jaw, biting down on the ache. Boots crunched on the gravel behind her. Jessica turned, expecting some junior officer with orders to clear her from the premises. Instead, she found herself face to face with Chief Petty Officer Miguel Ramirez. He was one of the toughest SEALs she had ever flown for, built like stone, his face weathered from too many deployments. She remembered his voice over the comms on that night in Helmand Province when his team was pinned down. She had flown low, risked ground fire, and torn apart the ambush holding them hostage. "Ma'am," Ramirez said, his voice low, deliberate. Jessica raised a brow. "Chief, you don't have to." Before she could finish, Ramirez snapped his hand up into a salute. Crisp, sharp, unwavering. The sound of his palm slapping against his brow echoed in the still air. Jessica froze, breath catching in her throat. "Chief," she whispered. Ramirez's eyes didn't waver. "You kept us alive, Valkyrie. Don't think for a second we forget that." Her chest tightened, a knot forming in her throat. But before she could respond, the sound of more boots filled the air. She turned her head and saw the men emerging from the barracks, one after another, all SEALs she had flown with before. Petty Officer Collins, the wiry sniper who once told her he trusted her eyes in the sky more than his own. Sergeant Hall, whose leg she knew had a scar shaped like shrapnel from the mission she covered in Kandahar. Lieutenant Foster, the quiet one who rarely spoke, but whose salute now was as sharp as any blade. They lined up beside Ramirez, forming a row across the tarmac. One by one, their hands rose. Dozens of salutes, silent but thunderous. Jessica's breath hitched. She stepped back slightly, overwhelmed. "What are you doing?" Ramirez didn't blink. Showing the truth. Her throat burned, her voice barely audible. "The Admiral threw me out." "You'll catch hell for this." "Then let him come," Ramirez said. His jaw tightened. "We answer to the Navy, but we survive because of you. That's not politics. That's blood." The words hit harder than any reprimand. More SEALs appeared, drawn by whispers spreading across the base like wildfire. Soon there were 2 rows of them, facing her, arms raised in perfect unison. The tarmac transformed into something more sacred than any parade ground. These weren't rehearsed salutes. These weren't orders. This was loyalty, carved into the very marrow of the men who had lived because of her. Jessica felt her knees threaten to buckle, but she locked them tight. She couldn't show weakness now. They weren't saluting the officer stripped of duty. They were saluting the warrior who had never abandoned them. A lump swelled in her throat. She wanted to speak, to tell them to stand down, to tell them not to risk their careers for her. But when she opened her mouth, no words came. Her voice failed under the weight of the moment. So she did the only thing she could. She raised her hand, returning the salute. The line of SEALs held steady, like a wall of steel. From the windows above, Rear Admiral Kane watched. His blinds were tilted just enough to give him a view of the tarmac. His hand gripped the edge of his desk, so tightly his knuckles whitened. He had wanted to make an example of Jessica Hayes, to prove no one was above his authority. But as he watched the their men stand against him silently, he felt a knot form in his stomach. These weren't just soldiers. These were the best America had. And they weren't saluting their admiral. They were saluting her. Kane turned away from the window, pacing. His chest burned with a mix of fury and something he didn't want to name: doubt. He had underestimated her. Outside, Jessica dropped her salute and lowered her eyes. The SEALs held theirs a moment longer before, as one, dropping their arms. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Jessica exhaled, steadying herself. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring: disciplinary action, discharge, maybe even court-martial. But right now, standing before the men who owed her their lives, she knew one thing: the Admiral's dismissal didn't erase who she was. It only proved it. And deep inside, as she met Ramirez's eyes, she felt something stir again. Not defiance, not anger, but resolve. This wasn't the end of Valkyrie. It was just the beginning. Rear Admiral Thomas Kane stood at the window, blinds tilted just enough to keep his officers from noticing the way his eyes lingered on the tarmac below. From his office perch, he had the perfect view: rows of SEALs, their arms raised and synchronized. Salute to a woman he had just thrown out of his program. The sight clawed at him. He wanted to believe it was nothing an emotional gesture, a momentary show of camaraderie. But his instincts, sharpened by decades in uniform, told him otherwise. That wasn't defiance born of impulse. It was loyalty carved from experience. And loyalty, that strong, was dangerous. Kane turned from the window, jaw tightening. His office was immaculate, each folder stacked with precision, each plaque gleaming. A shrine to order, to discipline. Yet that order had just been rattled by the simplest of gestures: a salute. The door burst open. His aide, Lieutenant Brooks, strode in, papers clutched tight, face pale. "Sir, we just got new intel." Situation's escalated. Kane straightened, pushing his irritation down. "Report." Brooks placed the folder on his desk, flipping it open. Satellite images, grainy but sharp enough to show heat signatures, sprawled across the pages. "Hostages, sir. American aid workers. Confirmed alive inside this compound here." He tapped a red-circled building nestled deep in enemy territory. "SEAL Team 9 is prepping for deployment." But there's a problem. Kane leaned over the folder, scanning the notes. Enemy fortifications, SAM sites, anti-aircraft guns embedded along the ridgeline. A nightmare. What kind of problem? Kane asked, though he already suspected the answer. Brooks' throat bobbed. Without air support, the team won't make it past the perimeter. Drones can't get close, the jamming field's too strong. And he hesitated. We don't have another pilot cleared for that kind of precision strike. Kane's stomach twisted. He already knew who Brooks wasn't naming. Jessica Hayes, Valkyrie, the very pilot he had dismissed less than an hour ago. Kane pressed his palms against the desk, the weight of the decision already pressing down like a physical burden. "Could we delay?" he asked. Brooks shook his head. "No, sir. Intel suggests the hostages may be moved within the next 24 hours. If that happens, they disappear into the network. We'll never find them again." The Admiral's chest tightened. Every scenario ended in disaster without air cover. He knew it. Brooks knew it. And worst of all, the SEALs knew it. Kane sank into his chair, staring at the photographs spread across his desk. Each one was a reminder that American lives hung on the edge of his decision. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "There are other pilots," he muttered. Brooks didn't move. None with her record. None with her instincts. She's done this before. "Sir, they're already asking for her." Kane looked up sharply. "Who's asking?" "Ramirez, Hall, Foster. The SEAL leadership. They won't move without her." Kane's teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. This was spiraling out of control. He had tried to cut her down, to show everyone that the chain of command was unbreakable. Yet here she was, commanding more loyalty in exile than he could with stars on his collar. He stood abruptly, pacing. If I reinstate her now, it undermines everything. It tells every officer that insubordination gets rewarded. Brooks hesitated, then asked softly, "And if you don't, sir?" The words hung heavy in the air. Kane turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. He saw a man of authority, decorated and respected. But behind him, just faintly visible, was the tarmac and the memory of those salutes. The men had already chosen their leader. Down below, Jessica sat on the edge of a concrete barrier near the hangar, her flight bag at her feet. She was silent, eyes fixed on the runway, though her mind churned with a storm of thoughts. She knew Kane wouldn't forgive what he saw as insubordination. In his world, authority wasn't questioned. But Jessica's world was different. She had spent years in cockpits where a split-second decision could mean life or death, where hesitation killed. You didn't survive in those skies by blindly following orders. You survived by seeing the truth faster than anyone else. She didn't regret speaking up. She regretted nothing. But what she couldn't shake was the look in Ramirez's eyes when he saluted her. That steady, unflinching respect. It reminded her of why she had fought so hard in the first place. Not for medals, not for politics, for the men who trusted her. "Ma'am," Jessica turned. Ramirez stood there, helmet under his arm. Behind him, Foster and Collins approached. The air between them was thick, heavy with unspoken understanding. Ramirez lowered his voice. "Word is they're gearing up a mission. Hostages. Heavy defenses. The kind of mission that doesn't come back without air cover." Jessica's stomach dropped. She didn't need him to spell it out. "They'll need you," Foster said simply. Jessica shook her head. The Admiral made his choice. Ramirez stepped closer, his voice like gravel. "Then the Admiral's wrong. And if he won't admit it, we'll make him." Jessica stared at him, then at the others. She saw it in their faces, the same look she had seen in combat, the unspoken trust that no rank, no dismissal could erase. She exhaled slowly. "If Kane calls, I'll fly. But until then, I'm grounded." Ramirez's lips twitched into a thin smile. "He'll call." Back in his office, Kane sat alone, the photographs still spread across his desk. The weight of command pressed heavier than it had in years. He thought about his career, about the rules that had carried him to this office. Discipline, order, control. But as he stared at the satellite images, he couldn't shake the image of those SEALs saluting Jessica Hayes. His aide's words echoed, "They won't move without her." For the first time, Kane wasn't sure if he commanded anything at all. The phone on his desk buzzed, a secure line. Kane hesitated before picking it up. "Admiral," came the voice on the other end, low and urgent. "The SEALs are refusing to deploy without Valkyrie. You'll have a mutiny on your hands if you don't bring her in." Kane's throat tightened. The choice wasn't his anymore. It had never been. And as the line went dead, Kane realized something chilling. He hadn't broken Valkyrie. He had made her unstoppable. Rear Admiral Thomas Kane sat in his office, the room dim except for the lamp casting a hard glow across his desk. The base outside had grown quiet, the low rumble of jets replaced by distant hums of generators. His hand rested on the folder containing the latest intel, the hostages, the compound, the fortified defenses. It stared back at him like a verdict. He had spent his career mastering control. Men obeyed his orders because he made sure there was no alternative. But now an entire SEAL team had refused deployment unless one woman, a woman he had dismissed, was reinstated. The thought burned him from the inside. His aide, Lieutenant Brooks, stood stiffly by the door. "Sir," he said, breaking the silence, "the SEALs are holding their ground. They won't board the transport until Valkyrie is cleared to fly." Kane's hand clenched around the edge of his desk. "Then ground them. Replace them if you must." Brooks hesitated. "With respect, sir." You can't. These men are irreplaceable. And time is running out. Kane's jaw tightened. He could almost hear the laughter of fate in his ears. The situation had backed him into a corner where every option carved away at his authority. If he doubled down, he risked lives and perhaps his career. If he relented, he admitted he was wrong. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. Wrong. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "Bring her here." Jessica Valkyrie Hayes was in the barracks, stripping the patches from her flight suit when the knock came. She didn't turn at first. She just kept tugging the Velcro away, jaw set. "Lieutenant Commander," Brooks said carefully, stepping inside. "The Admiral wants to see you." "Now." Jessica laughed once, bitter and sharp. "Does he? Did he forget he threw me out less than 12 hours ago?" Brooks' expression remained flat, though the corner of his eye twitched. "Things have changed. The mission depends on you." Jessica froze. She set the patch down slowly and looked at him. "No," she said, her voice low but fierce. "It always depended on me." He just didn't want to admit it. Brooks didn't argue. He simply nodded toward the door. "Come on, ma'am." "They're waiting." Jessica grabbed her bag and followed. The Admiral's office was quiet when she entered, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Kane stood behind his desk, his silhouette framed by the glow of the lamp. He looked at her like a man weighing a weapon he wasn't sure he could control. "Lieutenant Commander," he began, his voice clipped. "Admiral," Jessica answered, standing tall, refusing to look smaller than him. Kane gestured toward the chair in front of his desk. She didn't sit. He cleared his throat. "Your conduct earlier was inappropriate. You undermined my authority in front of senior officers. That cannot be ignored." Jessica's face didn't move, though her pulse quickened. She had expected this, his need to remind her who wore the stars. "But," Kane continued, "circumstances have shifted. The mission at hand requires unique capabilities. The SEALs insist on your involvement. I'm willing to authorize your reinstatement for this operation only." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Reinstatement?" She let the word hang between them. "Let's call it what it is, Admiral." "You need me." Kane stiffened, his jaw twitching. "Don't push me, Hayes. This isn't a negotiation." Jessica took a step closer, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. "You're right. It's not. Because while you're worried about your chain of command, I'm worried about men walking into a slaughterhouse. The SEALs trust me because I've never let them down. That's not arrogance, sir. That's fact." The silence stretched. Kane's face was stone, but his eyes betrayed him flickering with something like doubt. Jessica pressed on. "You want me back for one mission? Fine, but understand this. I won't fly to serve your pride. I'll fly to bring them home. If that's a problem, tell Ramirez and his men they're on their own. See how far that gets you." Her words cut like steel. Kane felt them settle deep into his gut. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't in control of the room. She was. He straightened, lifting his chin. "You'll have your clearance. Your jet will be prepped within the hour. Don't mistake this for forgiveness." Jessica gave a thin smile, cold but real. "I don't need forgiveness. I need airspace." And with that, she turned on her heel, leaving the Admiral in silence. After she left, Brooks stepped into the office, holding a fresh folder. "Orders signed, sir?" he asked cautiously. Kane didn't answer right away. He stared at the closed door, the echo of her words still hanging in the air. For decades, his command had been absolute. But tonight, he had felt something terrifying, irrelevance. Finally, he exhaled, sinking into his chair. Get her in the air. And pray to God she's as good as they say. Brooks didn't reply. He didn't need to. In the hangar, Jessica climbed the ladder to her jet, her fingers brushing the cool steel of the fuselage. The ground crew worked silently around her, fueling, checking, tightening. She strapped herself into the cockpit, the familiar smell of oil and metal wrapping around her like armor. For the first time since the Admiral dismissed her, she felt at home. Ramirez appeared below, helmet under his arm. He looked up at her, his expression calm but resolute. "Glad to have you back, Valkyrie," he said. Jessica adjusted her visor. "I was never gone." The canopy lowered, sealing her inside. As the engine roared to life, the hangar vibrated, the sound building into a thunder that rattled every wall. Jessica's hands danced across the controls, every switch familiar, every movement instinctive. The jet wasn't just a machine. It was her weapon, her shield, her voice. And tomorrow, it would be the difference between life and death. In his office, Kane poured a glass of water, his hand trembling just slightly. He watched the shadows of jets streak across the runway outside and told himself he was still in command. But deep down, he knew the truth. The Navy answered to him. The SEALs answered to her. And tomorrow, the world would see the difference. The first rays of dawn cut across the horizon, staining the sky in bands of orange and blood red. On the tarmac, the hangar doors yawned open, spilling light over the waiting transport birds and armored vehicles. Engines coughed to life, rotors thumped against the morning air, and the base shifted into the hum of imminent war. For SEAL Team 9, it was no drill. They moved with quiet efficiency, gear strapped tight, weapons slung, helmets glinting faintly in the sun. Each man carried a grimness that spoke louder than any words. They knew the odds. They had seen the intel. And still, they walked forward without hesitation. Jessica Hayes, call sign Valkyrie, stood among them for a brief moment, her flight helmet tucked under her arm. Though she wouldn't ride in their transport, she had made it a point to walk the line, meeting each set of eyes. Ramirez grinned at her, even as he checked his rifle. "Always wanted a Valkyrie watching my six," Jessica smirked. "Just don't make me work too hard, Chief." The others chuckled, the tension breaking for just a heartbeat. She saw it then, the reason they trusted her. Not because she was flawless, not because she was invincible, but because she was present. In their world, presence was everything. Inside the command center, Rear Admiral Kane leaned over the operations table, the glowing map casting sharp shadows across his face. Dozens of personnel worked the room comes officers, satellite analysts, tactical advisors, but the Admiral's attention never left the moving markers on the screen. A green blip tagged as Valkyrie 1 pulsed at the edge of the radar grid. Her jet was taxiing into position. Soon she would be airborne. Kane exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had signed the order, reinstated her temporarily, and the machine was already in motion. But the bitterness clung to him. She had cornered him without even trying, simply by existing as the one person the SEALs trusted more than him. And now, she was the key to whether his operation succeeded or collapsed. "Valkyrie, this is Control," the comms officer said, voice calm through the headset. "You are clear for takeoff." "Repeat, clear for takeoff." On the runway, Jessica tightened her gloves and lowered the visor. The cockpit hummed to life around her, lights and gauges glowing like stars in a private galaxy. She could feel the beast beneath her, the F-22 hungry for the sky. She spoke into the mic, her voice even. "Control, Valkyrie 1, rolling now." Her hand eased the throttle forward. The jet surged, the runway blurring into streaks of light. For a moment, gravity tried to hold her back, but then the nose lifted and the ground fell away. She was airborne. The sunrise split the canopy, flooding the cockpit with gold. Jessica let herself smile, not wide, but just enough. Up here, she was free, "SEAL transport, this is Valkyrie 1. I've got you covered," she said into comms. From the transport, Ramirez's voice came through, rough but steady. "Copy that, Valkyrie? Don't be late to the party." Back on the tarmac, Kane watched the jet climb, the afterburners painting the sky. The room behind him buzzed with activity, but for a second, all he saw was the lone aircraft cutting upward into the dawn. He hated to admit it, but it stirred something inside him, an echo of a time when he had been young, daring, willing to gamble everything for the mission. That time had passed for him, but for her, it burned alive. "God help us," he muttered under his breath. Hours later, the operation neared enemy territory. The SEALs transport flew low, hugging valleys, the desert below stretching endless and hostile. Inside, the men sat in silence, their faces hidden behind night vision goggles, their weapons ready. Ramirez checked his watch, then looked across at Hall and Foster. No words were needed. They all felt the weight of what lay ahead. Above them, high enough to be unseen, Valkyrie prowled the skies. She scanned her HUD, eyes darting between heat signatures and radar blips. The enemy's anti-air defenses painted her sensors like scars. One wrong move, and she'd be a fireball in seconds. "Control, Valkyrie," she reported, voice calm but clipped. "SAM sites confirmed. 4 active, grid coordinates marked." "Copy, Valkyrie," came the reply. "You are weapons free." Her thumb hovered over the release. Her heart steadied. She remembered her father's words from years ago, when she was still a trainee. "The jet is an extension of you. Don't fight it, be it." She pressed down. The missiles streaked away, cutting white scars across the dawn sky. Seconds later, explosions ripped through the ridgeline below. Fireballs bloomed, smoke rose. The jamming signals crackled, then faded. The way was clear. In the transport, Ramirez felt the thump of the blasts even at their altitude. He looked out the small porthole and smirked. "That's our Valkyrie," Foster chuckled. "Remind me never to get on her bad side." In the command center, cheers broke out as the red markers of the SAM sites vanished from the digital map. Kane didn't cheer. He only tightened his grip on the table. This was exactly why he had resisted her. Her brilliance, her precision, it made everyone else look smaller. And Kane had built a career on never looking small. Still, he couldn't deny the truth before his eyes. Without her, the mission would have been over before it began. "Maintain focus," he barked at his staff. "This isn't over yet." For Jessica, it was only the beginning. Her radar pinged again new signatures. Enemy aircraft scrambling. She adjusted course, her breath steady, her fingers light on the controls. "Control, Valkyrie. Be advised, enemy fighters inbound, 3 o'clock, high." Static, then Kane's voice himself came through. "Valkyrie, your priority is the SEALs. Do not get bogged down in a dogfight." Jessica smirked behind the mask. "Copy, Admiral." "Don't worry, I know how to multitask." The sky ahead filled with contrails, the sun glinting off hostile wings. Her blood surged. This was her element. She angled her jet, missiles armed, and whispered to herself the only prayer she ever believed in. "Let me be faster." The hunt was on. The desert stretched beneath her like a sea of broken glass, every ridge jagged, every valley a shadowy trap. Jessica Hayes Valkyrie kept her eyes locked on the HUD, the radar pulsing red with 3 hostile aircraft closing fast. The afterburners roared behind her, pushing her jet higher into the thinning air. The first missile streaked past her canopy, a white-hot blur that missed by mere meters. She yanked the stick, banking hard, G-forces slamming her chest. Alarms shrieked in her ears. "Control," Valkyrie engaged. 3 hostiles on my tail," she reported, voice steady despite the chaos. From the command center, Kane's voice cracked through. Valkyrie, break contact. Your priority is keeping airspace clear for the SEAL insertion. Jessica gritted her teeth. Break contact? Not a chance. If she turned her back now, those fighters would shred the transport carrying Ramirez and his men. Negative, Admiral, she said coldly. If I don't handle them now, there won't be an insertion. She cut the channel before he could argue. Down below, inside the SEAL transport, Ramirez felt the aircraft lurch as turbulence rattled its frame. He glanced at Foster, who was calm as ever, chewing gum like it was just another day. Think she's got it? Hall muttered, tightening the strap on his harness. Ramirez smirked. If she didn't, we'd already be a fireball. The men chuckled, but their eyes betrayed nerves. They all knew their lives depended not just on their training, but on one woman dancing with death in the skies above. Jessica dove low, dragging her jet across the sand-colored ridges, the enemy fighters in hot pursuit. Sweat stung her eyes as she yanked the stick, pulling the F-22 into a climb, so sharp it felt like her body might rip apart. The enemy overshot, and she seized the moment. Her thumb slammed the trigger. Fox 2. The missile streaked, slamming into the enemy's wing. A fireball bloomed across the sky. One down. But no time to celebrate, the other two were still there, closing in fast. The second fighter looped overhead, spitting tracers that zipped across her canopy like glowing needles. She rolled hard, the world flipping, then flattened out just above the desert floor. Her breath came hard, but her focus never wavered. The jet wasn't just her machine, it was her body. And right now, her body was at war. In the command center, Kane's knuckles whitened around the edge of the operations table. On the screen, the green dot of Valkyrie's jet twisted and turned against the red enemy markers. She's reckless, he muttered. Brooks, standing just behind him, glanced up. She's surviving, sir. And so are the SEALs. Kane didn't reply. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew Brooks was right. The transport dropped altitude, skimming over the desert floor. 2 minutes to drop. A pilot shouted back to the SEALs. Ramirez stood, checking his weapon one last time. He looked at his men, Hall, Foster, Collins, and the rest. Listen up. Whatever happens up there, he nodded toward the roof, we get the hostages out. No excuses, no hesitation. Yes, Chief. They barked back. The ramp door creaked open, desert wind howling into the cabin. One by one, they clipped their lines, eyes hard with focus. Ramirez muttered under his breath, Come on, Valkyrie. Just give us the opening. Jessica's radar screamed again, lock-on warning. The last two fighters had split, boxing her in. Clever. They thought they had her cornered. She smiled grimly. Bad move. She cut throttle suddenly, the jet shuddering as it slowed. The first enemy shot past her, overshooting its kill zone. Jessica rolled inverted, dove behind it, and let loose. Fox 2. The second explosion lit up the dawn. 2 down. The last fighter swung wide, determined to avenge its wingman. Jessica's fuel gauge flashed in her periphery, but she ignored it. This one needed to go down. She pulled the jet into a high G spiral, dragging the enemy higher, higher until thin air clawed at her lungs, and the jet rattled from strain. At the apex, she flipped, nose down, and fired. Fox 2. The final hostile disintegrated into fire. Her chest heaved, sweat soaking her flight suit, but her lips curved into a fierce grin. The sky was hers again. Control, Valkyrie. Bandits down. Airspace clear. SEALs are free to drop. On the transport, Ramirez heard the update and grinned. That's our green light, boys. Time to make history. The light above the ramp shifted from red to green. Go, go. Ramirez barked. One after another, the SEALs leapt into the roaring desert wind, parachutes deploying, shadows falling across the sand below. The mission was on. From above, Jessica circled, watching the black dots of the SEALs drift toward their target zone. She knew her fight wasn't over. Enemy reinforcements would come. But for now, she had done what she came to do. She clicked comms. "Ramirez, you're clear." "I'll keep the sky clean." His voice crackled back, steady as ever. "Knew you would." "Thanks, Valkyrie." In the command center, Kane exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The insertion was successful. The SEALs were on the ground. The enemy fighters were gone. But instead of relief, what he felt was unease. Every officer in the room had seen it. Every enlisted man had felt it. This mission belonged to Valkyrie, not him. And tomorrow, when the story spread through every corridor, through every unit, it wouldn't be his name on their lips. It would be hers. Jessica tightened her grip on the controls, eyes scanning the desert below. The SEALs were ghosts now, vanishing into shadows, but she would not leave them. She whispered into her helmet, words only she could hear. "Fly or die." "Not today." The jet roared, slicing across the dawn sky like a blade of fire. The real war had just begun. The desert air was razor-thin, dry as bone, the kind of heat that seemed to shimmer even before the sun hit its peak. SEAL Team 9 drifted through the sky like shadows, parachutes blooming and collapsing as they touched down in the sand. Chief Ramirez hit the ground first, rolling, then rising into a crouch. His rifle swept the horizon, every movement fluid. "Form up," he ordered through comms, his voice clipped but calm. Within minutes, the team was assembled. Hall checked his gear. Foster scanned their perimeter. Collins unfolded a portable drone for reconnaissance. They moved like a machine, every part practiced, lethal, efficient. "Target compound is 2 clicks northeast," Ramirez said. "Hostages are inside the central structure. Expect heavy contact." Foster gave a grin, chewing his gum lazily. "Heavy contact's what we came for." The men chuckled quietly, tension breaking, but only for a heartbeat. Then their faces hardened again. This wasn't bravado, it was survival. High above, Jessica Hayes flew a lazy circle, her F-22 tracing arcs against the pale sky. She could see their parachutes still collapsing on the desert floor. Now nothing but specks of fabric. Her HUD tracked them as green blips, faint against the endless sand. "Control, Valkyrie," she said into comms. "Team 9 is on the ground, moving toward objective." "Copy, Valkyrie," the comms officer replied. But Kane's voice cut in, sharp as a blade. "Stay focused. If you burn too much fuel babysitting, you'll be out when they need you most." Jessica's lips curved in a cold smile beneath her visor. "With respect, Admiral, they'll always need me most." She cut the channel before he could respond. The compound came into view, mud brick walls, fortified with steel, surrounded by makeshift watchtowers. It wasn't much to look at, but Jessica knew the inside was a death trap. Satellite images had shown layers of defenses, mines, bunkers, choke points. From her altitude, the walls looked small, but for the men moving toward them on foot, they loomed like mountains. Ramirez crouched behind a ridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Through the lenses, he counted guards patrolling the wall, weapons glinting in the light. 2 nests at north, 1 at east, he reported. "Hall, Collins, take them quiet." "Foster, you're with me." "Valkyrie, we may need a distraction." Jessica clicked her mic twice affirmative. The first shots came quick, sharp, silenced. Hall dropped 1 guard clean with a suppressed round. Collins knifed another before he could turn his head. The patrols crumpled without a sound. But then 1 gunner spotted movement. A single shout split the air, followed by a burst of automatic fire. Compromised. Ramirez barked. Move, move. Bullets tore across the sand. Dust exploded around them. The SEALs sprinted, spreading into formation, rifles barking in response. Jessica banked hard above, locking onto the east tower. Fox 2, she whispered, loosing a missile. The tower erupted in flame, the gunner's shouts silenced mid-cry. The wall shuddered with the impact. Ramirez's voice crackled through comms. Nice timing, Valkyrie. Jessica smirked, even as she pulled back to altitude. Don't get used to it. In the command center, the digital map lit up with red markers as enemy forces swarmed toward the compound's perimeter. Kane leaned over the display, jaw tight. She's drawing too much attention with those strikes, he muttered. Brooks glanced at him. She's keeping them alive, sir. Kane didn't answer. His chest burned with frustration. Every victory, every move the team made, it all came with her name attached. Not his. Inside the compound's outer wall, the SEALs pushed forward, sweeping corners, clearing doorways. The crack of rifles, the thump of grenades echoed through the courtyards. The defenders fought viciously, their shouts bouncing off the walls, but Team 9 carved through them like water cutting stone. Hall planted charges on a steel-reinforced door. Breaching in 3, 2, 1, the explosion thundered, dust choking the air. They surged inside. The central structure loomed, thick walls scarred by fire and patched with rusted sheet metal. Somewhere inside, the hostages were alive, or so the intel promised. But the enemy wasn't retreating. They were flooding in from tunnels, from hidden doors, from the very earth itself. Contact rear, Foster shouted, cutting down 2 fighters with precise bursts. Ramirez spun, firing. We need cover. Jessica's voice cut in like steel. Say the word. Ramirez ducked as a rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the wall above him. Dust rained down. Word! He barked. High above, Jessica rolled her jet, locking onto a cluster of enemy reinforcements rushing in trucks toward the compound's east gate. She loosed 2 bombs, and the earth below erupted in fire and smoke. The shockwave rattled the SEALs, but it also cleared their flank. Ramirez exhaled. That'll do. Jessica scanned the horizon. More hostiles were coming, dust trails rising in the distance. She could feel her fuel gauge ticking lower, but she ignored it. Her men were still inside. Her men. She hadn't realized when she started thinking of them that way. But now, it was the only truth that mattered. Inside the compound, the SEALs fought room by room. Blood smeared the walls. The smell of smoke and sweat clogged the air. Foster dragged a wounded enemy fighter aside, while Hall kicked open another door. And there huddled in the corner of a windowless room were the hostages. 6 men and women, their faces gaunt, eyes wide with terror. Ramirez moved forward first, lowering his weapon. Use Navy SEALs, he said, his voice calm. You're going home. The hostages sobbed, clinging to one another. But Ramirez's earpiece crackled before relief could settle. Ramirez, Jessica's voice said, urgent now. You've got armor inbound. Enemy technicals with mounted guns, 2 clicks out. If you're not out in 10, you're surrounded. Ramirez looked at his men, then at the hostages. Then we're out in 9. In the command center, Kane's fingers drummed against the table. The map showed Valkyrie pulling tight circles, conserving fuel, waiting for the extraction signal. He could feel it slipping through his hands. The mission, the loyalty, the narrative. When history wrote this down, it wouldn't be his stern orders in a clean office that saved lives. It would be Valkyrie, raining fire from the heavens. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jessica dipped her jet, engines howling. Her eyes locked on the dust trails of the enemy reinforcements. She whispered to herself, steadying her breath. One more dance, and with that, she dove. The night was fractured with fire and smoke. The compound shuddered with each explosion, its walls buckling under the relentless assault. Inside, Ramirez pushed the hostages forward, his team forming a shield of rifles and armor. Every step felt like a gamble against time. "Hall, take point," Ramirez barked. Collins rear guard. The hostages stumbled, but adrenaline carried them. Fear sharpened their movements more than strength ever could. 2 clicks to exfil, Foster shouted over the gunfire. Birds are inbound, but the desert was alive with headlights enemy trucks bounding across the sand, mounted weapons bristling. High above, Jessica's F-22 tore through the sky like a silver phantom. Her HUDs screamed warnings, fuel at critical, ammo depleted. She was down to her last payload. Her voice came through the SEAL's comms, steady as stone. "Valkyrie here. I see you. I've got one last song to sing." Ramirez glanced up, even though he couldn't see her through the smoke. "Make it count." Jessica's jet descended, engines howling against the desert night. She locked onto the convoy, charging toward the escaping SEALs. Her finger hovered over the trigger. "Fox 3, she whispered. The missile streaked from her wing, splitting the darkness. It struck the lead truck, detonating in a bloom of fire. Shrapnel tore through the vehicles behind it, flipping steel and flesh alike. The shockwave flattened the sand, throwing hostiles into chaos. Below, the SEALs surged forward, dragging the hostages through the gap Jessica had carved. In the command center, silence gripped the room. Every eye was on the live drone feed Valkyrie's jet, screaming through tracer fire, her missile tearing apart enemy reinforcements. Even Kane froze, his lips pressed tight. He wanted to curse her, to call her reckless. But no word came, because what he was watching wasn't insubordination. It was salvation. Jessica's breath rasped inside her mask. Her fuel gauge blinked red, a merciless countdown. She could either climb to safety or stay low, shielding the SEALs as they ran. The choice was no choice at all. "Ramirez," she said, voice firm. "I'll draw their fire. Get those people out." "No." Ramirez barked. "You've done enough." "Negative?" Her tone brooked no argument. "I don't stop until you're clear." And with that, she plunged lower, her jet screaming across the compound at treetop level. Enemy gunners swung their barrels skyward, unleashing storms of tracer rounds. They never touched her. On the ground, Hall shoved a hostage onto a waiting Black Hawk. "Move, move!" Foster fired a last burst, dropping 2 more fighters as he backed up the ramp. "Ramirez, that's all of them." Collins yelled. Ramirez was the last to board. He scanned the horizon, sweat cutting lines through the dust on his face. The hostages huddled inside, their sobs drowned by rotor blades. But Ramirez didn't climb in yet. He was watching the sky. Jessica banked hard, pulling the F-22 into a final arc. Her engines coughed fuel, almost gone. The desert below glowed with fire. She whispered into her comms, not sure if anyone would hear. "You're safe now." Then she pulled the jet vertical, climbing just high enough to break contact before leveling out toward the horizon. Her fuel warning screamed. She was running on fumes. "Control," she said, her voice steady. "Valkyrie requesting emergency divert." There was silence. Then Brooks' voice gentle, reverent. "We copy, Valkyrie. Divert vector sent. Bring her home." The SEAL's Black Hawks lifted off, rotors thrashing the smoke. Ramirez finally slumped into his seat, chest heaving. Across from him, Foster grinned through sweat and soot. "Hell of a guardian angel. he muttered. Ramirez only nodded. Words couldn't touch what they'd just seen. Back at the carrier, the command center erupted in shadow crew cheering, relief flooding the room. Screens lit with telemetry. Hostages secure, SEALs safe, Valkyrie limping home. But all the noise faded when Kane stood. The Admiral's face was stone, but inside, his pride was cracking. He wanted to claim credit, to say this was his command, his plan. But the truth was undeniable. None of them would be alive without her. Brooks broke the silence. Sir, you should see this. He pointed to the Feed Jessica's jet, crawling back to base, every system flashing warnings. And yet, she held the line until the end. The flight deck roared as the F-22 limped in, wobbling on final approach. Deck crews scrambled, signaling furiously. The jet touched down hard, tires screaming, then rolled to a stop. The canopy hissed open. Jessica climbed out, helmet tucked under her arm, flight suit streaked with sweat. The deck was silent at first, an almost sacred hush. Then Ramirez stepped forward, flanked by his men. Without hesitation, the SEALs snapped to attention. Their hands rose in perfect unison, saluting the woman who had carried them through hell. Kane froze on the deck's edge. The sight stabbed deeper than any reprimand. His SEALs, his warriors, were saluting her. Not him. Jessica met their eyes, one by one. She gave a small nod, acknowledging them, but never claiming more than what was already written in their gaze. Finally, her call sign echoed across the deck. A single voice shouted it first. Valkyrie. Others took it up, a chorus rising against the sea and sky. Valkyrie. Valkyrie. Kane's throat tightened. He turned away, but the sound followed him. Her legend had already outgrown his shadow. Jessica stood in the center of it all, helmet in hand, eyes blazing with quiet fire. She wasn't smiling, but inside, she felt the weight of what had been won. Not just a mission, not just survival, respect, the kind no order could command, no admiral could strip away. She had earned it in fire and steel, in blood and sacrifice. And from this day forward, every man who crossed her path would remember one truth. When the call sign Valkyrie was spoken, even the fiercest SEALs would rise and salute.